Hello, I'm Nima Rajan. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the federal government will send the provinces and territories $4 billion to increase the wages of essential workers in the COVID-19 pandemic. He said the details will still be finalized, with some provinces which will be expected to add their own money to the program as well. The PM says all the country's first ministers agree that frontline workers who are risking their health and make minimum wage deserve a raise. It will be up to each province to decide which workers count as essential and will get a top-up. Well, with cloth masks becoming more common as a possible means of preventing the spread of COVID-19, experts are reminding people what they should do to keep the face coverings effective. Masks need to be washed in hot water with detergent or dish soap to be sanitized against virus particles. Bleach can also be used but isn't necessary. And for anyone who has traveled Canada's roadways since the COVID-19 pandemic struck, there has been a noticeable drop in the volume of vehicular, transit, and pedestrian traffic. New data from Apple Maps suggests that Canadian users of the software made 80% fewer requests for directions on transit. Routing requests from drivers dropped by 42%, and pedestrian requests for maps fell by 40% over the same period. COVID-19 restrictions in Toronto are seeing some small changes. City residents are now being encouraged to keep their distance when going outside, rather than being told to stay home all the time. Mayor John Tory says the city is also taking steps to accommodate more pedestrians and cyclists so that they can follow physical distancing guidelines. Meanwhile, Atlantic Canada's fishing industry is hoping that the federal government will be able to help its fishermen ride out uncertain markets this year. Ian McPherson of the PEI Fishermen's Association says they are looking for programs that will help stabilize operations this year, as well as enable the industry to seek a more solid footing in 2021. Federal Fisheries Minister Bernadette Jordan has said the announcement of an aid package is, quote, days away. Meanwhile, Ontario's winemaking industry has been walloped by restrictions aimed at slowing the spread of COVID-19. Retail sales at wineries have gone down, and selling directly to restaurants has also suffered, while the costs of producing wine remains a constant. The Wine Marketing Association of Ontario's Magdalena Kaser says if wine lovers focus on buying local wines, it will make all the difference for the province's vintners. She says almost all 180 of the province's wineries are ramping up their online sales to try and compensate for the drop in retail sales. 2 people have been arrested in connection with a series of cell phone tower fires in Quebec. Provincial police say another 2 fires were set early this morning in Saint-Jérôme and Blainville, following others north of Montreal reported earlier this week. The force's major crimes unit is investigating possible links between the fires, including if they can be traced back to people holding conspiracy theories about 5G technology. Moving to the U.S. now, where some U.S. senators now say they'd like lawmakers to be tested for COVID-19. Their comments come days after congressional leaders declined an offer of 1,000 test kits from the Trump White House. The senators say members of Congress fly often, and testing would protect other travelers that they encounter. The head of the World Health Organization's Europe office said the agency is deeply troubled by reports of increasing domestic violence during the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Hans Klug says countries across Europe are reporting up to 60% of women are suffering domestic violence, and there has been a 5-fold increase in calls to help hotlines. The agency expects an extra 31 million cases of gender-based violence globally if pandemic lockdowns continue for 6 months. The United Nations is increasing its appeal to the fight against the coronavirus pandemic in fragile and vulnerable countries from $2 billion to $6.7 billion. The UN humanitarian chief has said that the peak of the pandemic is not expected to hit the world's poorest countries for 3 to 6 months. But there is already evidence of incomes plummeting and jobs disappearing, food supplies falling and prices soaring, and children missing vaccinations and meals. Since the original appeal on March 25th, the UN said $1 billion has been raised to support efforts across 37 fragile countries to tackle COVID-19. Emergency officials in India are updating the death toll from a chemical plant gas leak in the southern end of the country. At least 11 people are confirmed dead, and about 1,000 more suffered breathing difficulties and other problems. Styrene leaked from the LG Polymers plant while workers were preparing to restart the facility after a COVID-19 lockdown was lifted. Meanwhile, a virtual meeting of South African lawmakers was disrupted by hackers who flooded the video call with pornographic images. The hackers also hurled racial and sexual insults at the meeting's chairwoman, Thandi Modis. South Africa's parliament is closed and all meetings are currently held by video conference calls as the country remains under strict lockdown restrictions. The Israeli parliament has passed legislation approving a new coalition government. This paves the path for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz to join together in a controversial power-sharing deal. The legislation comes a day after Israel's Supreme Court ruled that it would not intervene in the new arrangement or prevent Prime Minister Netanyahu from leading the government, despite a corruption indictment against him. The decision ended the country's prolonged political stalemate and prevented Israel from holding its fourth consecutive election in just over a year. China's government says an experimental spaceship launched earlier this week is working normally in orbit. It has unfolded and positioned its solar panels and established a communication link. However, no information has been released about what went wrong with the cargo return capsule that was launched as part of the same mission. Officials would only say that it operated abnormally during the re-entry on Wednesday. Now, while the NBA, Major League Baseball, and the NHL remain idle because of the coronavirus outbreak, the NFL is taking some baby steps towards kicking off its season. The league has set up protocols for having teams open up their facilities and told the teams that the provisions need to be in place by May 15th. The outline sent to teams was obtained by the Associated Press. The first phase is to have a limited number of non-player personnel approved to show up at team facilities. The league says a plan that would see players begin to return hasn't yet been developed. Well, that'll do it for today's news update. I'm Nima Rajan. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll see you next time.